Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining in. I'm Evan Lester, and over the summer, I worked closely with Dr. Ivo Gorofsky on examining the interactive effects of political affiliation and outcome bias. In late summer, amidst the coronavirus pandemic, the 600 a week supplemental unemployment benefits provided by the federal government were about to expire with no plan to replace it. The result was a standoff in Congress over how much money the federal government should supply on top of pre-existing state benefits. Democrats rallied for a continuation of the $600 per week system, while Republicans countered with a preference for $200. The difference in federal spending between the two plans is trillions of dollars, approximately $3 trillion on the Democrat side and a little over $1 trillion on the Republican side. The standoff persisted despite the benefits running out before a deal was reached. This standoff is not at all unusual, especially in contemporary American politics. The Pew Research Center has been tracking the ever increasing differences between members of each of the major political parties in the United States since 1994. The results show that we are more polarized than ever. The question then is, how do we judge each other's political decisions in such a polarized climate? Before we examine how we judge political decisions, it would be beneficial to examine how we evaluate decision quality in general. In other words, what determines whether a decision is good or bad? Expected utility theory suggests that we are rational and deliberate in our estimates of the options available. Specifically, we assess our subjective notion of the potential utility or usefulness and the probability of the option occurring. These two things together create the expected utility of a potential choice. Rationally speaking, decision quality is a function of a cost-benefit analysis, with good decisions containing greater benefits than cost, whereas bad decisions contain more costs than they do benefits. EUT, however, does not specify precise factors that one focuses on when making decisions. Contrary to EUT, people are not always deliberate and calculated during the decision-making process. Rather, we often rely on heuristics. Heuristics are cognitive shortcuts in the decision-making process. These shortcuts make our lives much easier and processing significantly faster. These cognitive shortcuts are so automatic that most of the time we're unaware that they're even at work. However, systematic errors are extremely common when relying on such heuristics. An example of one of these systematic errors is outcome bias. This is when the evaluations of decision quality are a function of the desirability of the outcome of such decision. This is in fact a logical fallacy because an outside decision evaluator often has information that was not available to the decision maker at the time the decision was made. Yates et al. Showed that 95% of the time, a good outcome means a good decision, whereas a bad outcome means a bad decision 89% of the time. Outcome bias has been studied in a variety of contexts. Baron Hershey observed that decision evaluations were significantly higher when a major heart surgery succeeded as compared to when the patient didn't make it. This was observed despite the likelihood of the patient dying being held constant. Similarly, the desirability of the outcome has been observed to influence evaluations of how ethical we judge a decision to be. And lastly, levels of blame are affected by whether the decision succeeded or failed in conjunction with the prior culpability of the acting party. While political affiliation and ideology are not a one-to-one correlation, the majority of conservatives are self-identifying Republicans, while liberals are more often than not Democrats. Because of the differences in fundamental beliefs between the two sides of the political spectrum, i.e., structure and certainty for conservatives compared to complexity and openness for new experiences for liberals, we sought to examine how this may influence evaluations of decision quality. Gadarian et al. Observed that attitudes during the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic between self-identifying Democrats and Republicans differed significantly. For example, Democrats were significantly more worried about catching the virus as compared to Republicans. On top of this, the differences are not only in cognition, according to Gadarian, but also manifest in prosocial behaviors. For example, Democrats were also observed to wash their hands far more often than Republicans in response to the pandemic. While outcome bias has been examined in a variety of contexts, such as medical operations, monetary wagers, accidental harm, etc., it seems to have been underinvestigated in the context of politics. Therefore, the main question we aim to answer in the current study was, how does political affiliation interact with outcome bias? To do this, 104 participants were recruited online. Ages ranged from 18 to 67 years old, and the vast majority identified as white. Targeted recruitment in regard to political affiliation was done via cloud research. This supplied us with 58 Republicans and 46 Democrats. Participants' data was excluded if at least one of the two following conditions were met. First, if time spent on the study was less than 4 minutes, data was excluded. And secondly, if the standard deviation of their decision evaluations was less than 3.0, data was excluded. The final analyses included 92 participants, of which 47 were Republicans and 45 were Democrats. The study was programmed online via Qualtrics XM, whereas data was collected via Cloud Research, a data collection platform. Participants were presented with 16 vignettes describing a public policy decision in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Each vignette included a chance of the policy backfiring and having a significant adverse consequence. The likelihood of the policy backfiring was held constant at 8% in order to create ambiguity within the decision. This is based off pilot data by Barron and Hershey. Here on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see an example vignette with experimental manipulations color-coded blue or red, respectively. Here is a breakdown of all 16 experimental conditions. For policy, we have 4 different contexts: closing of businesses, a face mask mandate, administration of stimulus checks, and a government bailout of airline companies. These contexts are designed to play to the differing foci between Republicans and Democrats. As you can see in the AIM column, each policy context focuses on helping either public health or the economy. Business closure, for example, is designed to decrease the spread of the virus. However, doing so negatively impacts the economy. On the other hand, a face mask mandate aids public health while having no direct effect on the economy. The same manipulation pattern was continued for the stimulus checks and the airline bailout contexts, with the only difference being that these policies are focused on helping the economy instead of public health. We also manipulated the political affiliation of the public policy decision maker to be either Republican or Democrat. Lastly, we manipulated the desirability of the outcome to be either a success or a failure. Our main dependent measure was decision quality. This was done on a Likert type scale adapted from Barron and Hershey, ranging from -30, clearly incorrect, to 30, clearly correct, with 0 being the midpoint. We also measured age, race, gender, education, and income via self-report. As a manipulation check, participants were asked to complete Everett's 12-item social and economic conservatism scale, which aims to systematically measure political ideology on a temperature scale rather than self-report. In order to test the hypothesis that outcome will significantly interact with participants' political affiliation, the data was submitted to a 4 policy type: business closure, face mask mandate, stimulus checks, government bailout; by 2, decision maker affiliation, Republican or Democrat; by 2, outcome, success or failure, mixed model, repeated measures analysis of variance, with political affiliation entered as a between subject factor. We observed a significant main effect for outcome, and so that policies resulting in successes were evaluated significantly better as compared to policies resulting in failures. Additionally, within this omnibus test, a significant interaction between outcome and participant affiliation was observed. In order to analyze the planned contrast between the different aims of the policies, the data was submitted to a 2 policy aim, favor health or favor economy; by 2, decision maker affiliation, Republican or Democrat; by 2, outcome, success or failure, repeated measures analysis of variance. This was done separately for both Democrat and Republican participants. As expected, Republican participants were inclined to judge decision outcomes more favorably if they aligned with their political affiliation, especially if it was a success. If you look at the middle 2 bars in regard to health-related policies, Republican failure and Democrat success, you can see that Republican failures were rated higher than Democrat successes. Though the difference solely between these 2 values is not significant, This is representative of the Republican results as a whole. In contrast, Democrats were a lot more influenced by the focus of the policy. Democrats favored health-based policies significantly more than they favored economic-related policies. Additionally, Democrats were much more susceptible to outcome bias as compared to the Republican counterparts. Successes were rated significantly higher than failures, regardless of the decision maker's political affiliation. If you are to look at successes and failures together, there's virtually no difference in decision evaluations when a Democrat or a Republican policymaker was involved. Overall, we observe that outcome bias interacts with political affiliation in a significant way. Democrats focus on the outcome of the policy, while Republicans focus on the affiliation of the decision maker. While both Democrats and Republicans exhibited outcome bias tendencies, Democrats did this to a much larger extent. On the other hand, Republican participants exhibited a form of political bias that was not especially observed in Democrats. The results reported are consistent with the established literature on outcome bias. However, one aspect that is not consistent with the literature is the level at which participants feel the outcome should matter. Baron and Hershey reported that virtually all of their participants stated the outcome should have no effect on decision evaluation, whereas 75 of the 92 participants in the current study indicated that it should. This potentially suggests that outcome bias is not a systematic deviation from the normative model, as are most biases, but rather an unawareness of the logical fallacy involved. Going forward, I'm currently working on a study that aims to examine different types of consequences. In other words, are the successes and failures in a material context, such as monetary consequences, for example, or a personal context, such as personal harm or even death? A between subject design would be beneficial due to the possibility that participants are able to recall similar vignettes within the study. And lastly, the vignettes included in the current study were based off of high-profile, real-life events and public policies. Future research may benefit from utilizing fully hypothetical scenarios. In addition to the open questions provided online, please feel free to email either myself, Evan Lester, or my research advisor, Dr. Gorofsky, with any questions or comments. Thank you.